So Tom, I guess a good start to this, I love the imagery of the caught, not taught. And for 1,500 years, the Catholic faith was caught, and then the sort of catechetical movement came in, and now it was taught, and then now we're seeing Catholic schools closing, and we're seeing all sorts of Catholic education maybe somewhat disappearing. How do we have the faith caught again? And then do we infect with action, with word? How do we evangelize now?
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Matt. Great to be with you, and thank you. I mean, there's great wisdom to be learned, I think, from those first 1,500 years. Not that we can go back ways. But when I say that it was caught more than taught, now there was some teaching, but it was very minimal, the number of people who participated. There were the great monastic schools, the great cathedral schools, but they served probably no more than 4 or 5% of the population, if even that. In other words, the Western world became Christian simply by picking it up along the way, in the home, in the parish, in the village. And a great deal of it was by osmosis, by enculturation, rather than by intentional instruction, which isn't to minimize the importance of intentional instruction. It's terribly important, but it can't do it anymore. And in a sense, when you think about what happened with the invention of schools and the spread of schooling in the Western world and then moving into universal education, we began to, when you think religious education, we began to think schooling of some kind or other, either a parish school, parish program of religious education. And again, they're terribly important, but they can't replace the home. They can't replace the village. They can't replace the parish. So what this issue tries to do is to go back and think of all of the almost incidental ways, experiences of faith, especially of a lived faith, like sending young people into an immersion experience, into a retreat experience, into a pilgrimage experience. The rituals of the family. There's 2 wonderful essays in here. One by a Latino woman, Professor Nancy Pineda Madrid, who looks back on her Mexican-American experience and the kind of popular spiritualities that were carried on in the home that really, in many ways, were the source of how she caught her faith. The other essay is by one of is by Professor Ruth Langer, and writing out of her Jewish tradition. Rabbi Langer was raised in a devout Jewish home, and again, it was the rituals of the home. It was the Sabbath. It was keeping Passover. It was keeping kosher that, in a sense, inculcated her Jewish identity and faith. I think Catholicism, in particular, is rich in those kind of old possibilities and symbols and practices. And if we don't like the old ones, we should invent new ones. So if we can't get the whole family to sit down and say the rosary together every night, I can never get my family to do that, there are other things we can do every night that are equally capable of nurturing people's faith identity.
So what's the 21st century version of, let's say I have a family and my children, I can't get them to say the rosary. What's something that's comparable to that still sort of incubates the faith and passes on the faith?
And you know, it can be something terribly simple, Matt. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. Quick anecdote, I gave a workshop on this recently, and a young woman came up to me afterwards and said, Tom, fine for you to speak, you know, you're a 2-parent family and you only have 1 kid. I'm a single mom and I have 3 children. Now, what rituals can I do in my home that can hand on the faith to them? I'm busy, I've got to attend to the homework, I've got to cook dinner for them. I said to her, look, how long would it take for each evening before I asked her the age of her children, and they were like 8, 6, and 5. I said, how long would it take to take each child in your arms every night before they go to bed, give them a hug, and say, God loves you and I love you. Sleep well. I said, how long would it take? She said, 5 seconds. I said, do it every night, or do it most nights. And those children will grow up knowing that they're loved deeply by God and by you. That's faith. That's the basis. Then you can build. You can teach them the creed. You can teach them the catechism. You can teach them the dogmas and doctrines of our faith, and they'll catch, because there's a grounding there that is faith at its richest. So it doesn't take an awful lot. I think each family has to try to imagine what to do themselves. If I could give one more example, Matt. when Teddy, our little boy, came home to us at three days old, we were wondering how to decorate his room. And we were going to put up Tigger or whoever. And I said, let's get a good painting of the Good Shepherd. And we found a lovely painting, and it's Teddy, it's the Good Shepherd cuddling the lamb at its breast, not across the shoulders. That little boy has stopped at that picture more times than I can count. And we've talked together about this is how Jesus feels about you. He really is your good shepherd. And at tough times especially, he got I won't tell you what grade he got, but it wasn't a great grade the other day. He stopped at that picture coming out of his room. And I said, Teddy, ask your good shepherd to help you get to do better with homework tonight and the grade tomorrow. So it's even what we put on our walls. It's subtle things, and yet they have to be intentional. There was a time when we did them almost automatically. They were kind of just what parents did in the home. Now we have to stop, figure out what we should do, and be doing it.
And is it no longer intentional because now there's so many other distractions? We're not in a terribly religious society and things are secularized. And is it now worrying about how do I get my kids to focus on religion and Catholicism when at every moment they could be playing Angry Birds and watching TV and doing 1,000 other things?
And it's all of that. It's all of that. Well, how did you come by your faith, Matt? I mean, in the midst of that kind of world.
So I feel like I was the last generation to actually grow up without the internet. So I was born in 1983, and I felt like I grew up in a very devout Catholic family. And there weren't as many distractions. And then right when I hit high school, that stuff kind of came out. But I worry about that. You know, I'm recently engaged to my fiance is right over there. Quick plug for her. She's embarrassed now, but you know, I'm going to have kids one day with her, and like. It scares me to try and raise my kids the way I feel like my parents raised me, which I thought was a holistically beautiful, wonderful faith life.
Yes.
And it worries me to make sure that, how do I make sure I give to them as much as my parents gave to me?
Matt, I would say do what your parents did, even if it's adjusting the practices. Like, there's no surefire way to do this. I often say Teddy may grow up to be a Jesuit or an atheist, and there's no guarantee.
Do you have a preference?
Well, there are people who think he could be both, but we won't go there.
We are recording.
Of course, I'm joking, of course. But you see, say morning prayers with them. Say grace before meals, say night prayers, have the rituals, whatever the rituals might be. And we can go back into our old traditions and find rituals, for Christmas, for Easter, and what have you. And that I think can still work. Now, not to be unrealistic about all of the, the communications, media, and what have you, but you see, the Catholic attitude is that that's not a bad world. It's not as if there's a technology world out there that's bad and we have to avoid it. So we're not Amish or Mennonites, and they're dear people and wonderful Christians, but that's not our tradition. We see everything as being capable of giving honor and glory to God, and indeed of being engaged in order to nurture people in faith. It does take intentionality. The late Cardinal Lustiger, the Cardinal Archbishop of Paris, used to say, and I remember one of his famous sermons, that in some ways it's a tremendously challenging time for faith. In our secularized society, in our very difficult technologized world and so on. On the other hand, his comeback was, but it's a marvelous time for faith. It's a great time for chosen faith, for faith that we deliberately choose to pass on and organize our lives in order to do so. So in the home, you begin to watch everything because they pick up everything. You watch your language patterns and how you talk about yourselves, how you talk about other people. How is racism passed on? How is sexism passed on? How is militarism passed on? Or what John Paul II called economism. In other words, that money and possessions are the ultimate idol. Well, it's passed on through our language patterns in the home. And you can then look at every aspect of family life to recycle well. I mean, it's a care for the environment. So we're still capable of teaching those great Catholic values that our parents taught us. We just have to be more imaginative and more intentional, and perhaps adjust what we do It can be done.
Yeah, and for me a little bit, I don't look at technology as something that's averse to religion, but if you look at the history of the Catholic Church and how fantastic they were as communicators.
Sure.
For us to not be utilizing the best of technology to communicate nowadays would be a travesty. And that's part of a lot of the work why, for me, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Catholic TV, on their Catholic TV website, it's important to fill those spaces with good content.
Yes, that's why we're sitting here, Matt.
Yeah, no, I know. So what we hear a lot now, and I'm speaking from the 28-year-old perspective, and you will have a similar perspective as a 20-something yourself. Tell me this much. What do you say to most people when they say, religion is sort of passé? And when I started at Harvard, I sort of saw some intellectualism about, religion is anti-intellectual.
Yeah.
And they would say, I'm spiritual, I'm a seeker, I'm not religious. Religion is not cool, spirituality is cool.
Yeah.
Well,
first of all, when young people say to me, I'm spiritual but not religious, my response is, that's a great place to be in your life at this point in time. That's a great beginning, because you know what? We've got a fantastic spirituality to offer you. Well, what else is Catholic Christian faith? What is any tradition of Christian faith except a great rich spirituality? This is what it is. It's a great spiritual wisdom for life. They can be tremendously enhancing of people's lives. The bottom line is that a life lived with faith is an awful lot richer and humanizing than a life lived without it. And I think we have to develop a whole new apologetic on behalf of our Christian faith. And a new apologetic in the sense that the old apologetic, or the more recent apologetic from the Council of Trent or from the Protestant Reformation onward, the apologetic in many ways was simply authoritarian. In other words, you had to believe it. Why? Because the church said so. Well, nothing is ever true because the church said so. It's always true for a better reason, which of course is why the church says so. Or the Protestant way was to say, well, it's in the Bible. You have to believe it. Well, that type of authoritarian apologetic where we prove that when the church says it, it must be true. Why? Because it came from God to Jesus to the church, and you got to accept it. Maybe it worked one time. It won't work anymore. But I think we're capable of a far more positive, persuasive apologetic. For example, when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, I don't think he was kidding. What an extraordinary way it is to live. Imagine the amazing person I would be if I would faithfully follow the way of Jesus Christ. How loving, how faithful, how hopeful, how compassionate, how just, how peaceable, how hospitable, how inclusive, how welcoming, how you name it. A life I would live. It's an amazing way to live one's life, to follow the way of this Jesus of Nazareth. And then we believe in our faith that he not only modeled it, but that the risen Christ, by the Paschal mystery, actually released this, what Paul calls the abundance of God's grace in the world, so that it is possible to at least approximate living as he lived. So here we are with the way to live, with the resources to live it, and we can have constant access to those resources through the sacraments, through the faith community, and so on, so that it is possible. It's a fantastic way to live one's life. The Beatitudes, they're always translated as blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. But Makarios there can be equally translated as happy. So if you want to find happiness in life, then this is a fantastic way to go. So I think we have to mount that kind of persuasive apologetic, which is actually not new. In fact, it's as old as the church. When you go back and look at the old apologists, like Justin Martyr and Cyril of Jerusalem, this is exactly what they did. They weren't operating out of authority. They were operating out of persuasion, an invitation, that this is a wonderful way to live your life, and it's possible.
And I just sitting here, I'm even more jazzed about the Catholic Church, so thank you for the past couple minutes. But I was at a conference this past Saturday about the new evangelization, the year of faith, and they were talking a little bit about how other religions are more ambitious with some of their evangelization, and how the Catholic Church, if they aren't that way, then they don't know how to be evangelical.
Yeah.
In the sense of, if I have children, I know how to raise them Catholic in the faith in the church. But how do we be evangelical without being pushy, without knocking you on your head, be Catholic, or without kind of coming across as doing nothing?
Yes. You know, I always think in this regard of 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, where Peter says, you always have to be ready to give the reasons for the hope that is in you, for the faith and hope that you have. Be ready to share it, and yet do it with respect and gentleness. And one translation has reverence. In other words, don't beat people over the head with it. But you see, I think we have to be, I talk with my classes all the time about bringing our lives to our faith and our faith to our lives. And in many ways, that's what it amounts to. Taking your life and constantly bringing it to your faith, taking your faith and constantly bringing it to your life. And I think we have opportunities every day to put our faith to work in the ordinary and everyday of life. Quick story again. I was in an elevator coming down in a medical building yesterday with Teddy from an appointment. And this woman got on who was enormously pregnant. Like, I mean, she was so pregnant. She was the most pregnant woman I've seen in a long time. So I'm standing in the elevator, and she's standing there, and Teddy is standing here. So I said to her, I bet you're having a baby. And she said, yes, probably tomorrow. And I said, oh, okay. We closed the door gently. I said, well, blessings with it. And she said, oh, that's lovely. I said, blessings. And then Teddy looked at me, and I said, Teddy, I said, what's your name? And she'd said, Mary, whatever her name was. I said, Mary, we'll put you on our prayer list tonight. We'll say a prayer for you. Well, the woman teared up.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, it was the simplest thing. This was about an 8-10 second elevator ride. I said to her, we'll say a prayer for you tonight. Why wouldn't I say that to her? And we did.
You were probably saying a prayer in there that she doesn't have the baby
there,
right?
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
Elevator gets stuck, and you're yeah.
Oh, a stuck elevator would have been like
poor Teddy.
Yeah, but so we all got safely out of that elevator, and she went on her way, but deeply grateful. I mean, I wasn't imposing, I wasn't doing the pious piffle stuff, you know, but I said, we'll say a prayer for you tonight.
Yeah.
And I hope she had a wonderful, beautiful baby today. But I'm just giving as an example in the incidental and the everyday. I was going through the duty-free recently. I was going to Dublin for some lectures, and I went up to the duty-free to check, because I was bringing a few bottles of wine, and you actually can buy cheaper Irish at Logan than you can in Dublin. And so I put my bottles up to bring home to my family, and the young lady said to me, so, Professor Groom, Dublin is your final destiny? And I said, oh, no. Oh, I said, no. She said, well, what your final destiny? I said, oh, the presence of God. And she said, oh my God. I said, exactly. I said, heaven. I said, no, well, we had this huge conversation. She said, yeah, I used to go to Mass, and then I gave it up altogether. I thought it was a little hocus. I said, you know, it's wonderful. You might try it again. There was nobody behind us. We had this huge conversation about going to heaven and what's the final destiny. Meanwhile, yeah, I'm going to Dublin tonight, but that's not my final destiny. I'm simply saying every day brings opportunities to share our faith, to talk our faith, without imposing or without, as I said, you know, there's nothing more off-putting than the person at the water fountain who wants to praise Jesus and thank you, Jesus, and all the rest of it. That's not our tradition at all.
Right.
And yet, taking our faith, I love Evangelii Nunciandi, where it says, and allowing it to permeate every strata of our lives. To take the word, and Evangelii Nunciandi talks about it as a liberating and saving word, a liberating word of salvation. In other words, this can free people, this can save people's lives, and allowing it to permeate every strata of the everyday. Can be done.
Yeah, for me, even it's as simple as saying God bless you to someone as they sneeze.
And Matt, be sure to say God bless you.
Oh yeah.
Don't say bless you.
None of this bless you stuff.
Yeah, because we've no power to bless anybody. You can ask God to bless people, but you can't. You don't have the power to bless. But you have the power to ask God to bless them. So always say God bless you, because we've stopped saying it. Why? Well, it's just not politically correct anymore. We say Happy Holidays.
Yeah.
Instead of Have a Blessed Christmas.
Right.
I mean, gee, many Christmas.
Even at a restaurant, sometimes
Yes.
a family will say grace, and sometimes people will come up to us after and say, "Can I just let you know that it is so refreshing and heartening to see that people still do that, and they're not afraid to do it in public."
Yes.
And it's the sort of, are you an incognito Catholic, or are you just going to kind of own it?
Yeah, own it and without imposing it. can do it gently, subtly, and yet people will see, people will notice. You see, there's nothing more effective to evangelize than lived faith. And, we could quote Francis, I don't know if he ever said it or not, but he certainly gets the credit for it, that we preach the gospel all the time. Sometimes we have to use words. But I think we often lose sight of it. And that's where we started out this conversation with parents. I mean, the parent who doesn't practice their faith, who pays no attention to the values and the ethos of their home, and yet takes the child to their parish religious education program for 1 hour once a week, drops them off, goes and gets the groceries, and then thinks that they'll have a Christian to take home with them. I mean, it can't be done. You can't manufacture Christians that way. And then people say, oh, CCD, it doesn't work. Well, you'd pull rabbits out of a hat easier than you could get that to work. Now, the CCD program is terribly important. Don't neglect it. But any parent who thinks, I've done my duty now, because I dropped them off, picked them up, and took them home, can't be done.
A lot of folks talk to me about how when they think of being religious, it's going to Mass and how important the Mass is on the Sunday. And they sort of lose their faith because why would I go to church when the homilies are bad and the music's awful? And those are sort of arguments to me that pale in comparison to the power of the Eucharist at Sunday Mass. And I'm wondering, have you interacted with, you've gone through now decades of students and seen them evolve and grow and share their thoughts about the Mass. I mean, what have you told them when they would maybe say the Mass is no longer relevant?
Matt, I don't have very much to tell. First of all, you can't defend poor liturgy. I mean, the church has a requirement. It's an obligation. Our Sunday obligation is an obligation of our faith. But the obligation works both ways. We oblige people to participate, then the church is obliged to have a decent quality of liturgy. And it's possible. It's not rocket science at all. And so it's unfortunate and tragic when a parish neglects its liturgy, when the priest doesn't prepare well. That's terribly unfortunate. So I wouldn't want to in any way legitimate that. On the other hand, it's like everything else about our church that often disappoints us. There's always a greater good. There's a greater good there that outshines the bad sermons and all the rest of it. Who was it? O'Connor, the American author.
Flannery O'Connor? Flannery O'Connor, sorry, in her conversion to Catholicism. She went to church one Sunday with a Catholic friend, and the place was packed. It was a full church. And the sermon was absolutely god-awful. And she realized, or presumed, that there'd be nobody there the next Sunday. But just to prove her point, she went back again the next Sunday, expecting the church to be empty. And instead it was still full. And it dawned on her then that maybe there was some greater good going on that people knew about, and it wasn't the sermon, which isn't a legitimate bad sermon. It's simply to say, this deep faith that we have, that the risen Christ is truly present in the community assembled, present in the word proclaimed, but then we say body and blood present in the Eucharist. I mean, it's an extraordinary gift. It's an extraordinary conviction. And you can still, last Sunday, I literally, unobtrusively, I hope, because I wouldn't want to hurt the man's feelings, I looked for the missalette during the homily, and I reread the readings for that Sunday, and I reread the readings for next Sunday because of my birthday, and then I reread the readings for the following Sunday. And I punched in my time until he stopped. It was a terrible, terrible sermon. And it's not easy. I suppose the one that I worry about is Ted, because he comes out and says, Dad, that was awful. And what do I say in response? It's a real problem. Yeah. But I do think giving people this deep sense of the presence of the risen Christ with us in that assembly, in word community, but in a unique way in the Eucharist, I think that's our cherished heritage. Yeah. I think it's beautiful to see that in so many different cultures and communities. I've gone to many different masses in the Somerville, Cambridge area, including some masses not even in English and Portuguese and things like that. And I used to live in Poland, and seeing a little 3-year-old boy walk by a church, take off his hat, bless himself in front of the church, and then continue on. It's heartening to know that we look at our Catholic faith within our parishes and sometimes within our archdiocese, but to know that it is so much bigger than that, and how people practice faith in other countries. I'm curious if you've had other experiences, or if your hope for the Catholic Church is greater in terms of the spreading and the sharing through other countries, and knowing that this is a worldwide project.
Sure. And I mean, it is very heartening, and to see the expressions of it throughout the world, and how vibrant it can be in Central Africa or someplace. I suppose the faith here is in our Western cultures has become tired. And that was my understanding of John Paul II's intent with the new evangelization. It was the effort to take this old, tired faith and revitalize it. So in that sense, evangelization now is not about sending missionaries off to Africa or something. In fact, we've got missionaries from Africa coming here. It's a reverse missionary trend. But the new evangelization is, in a sense, about taking our faith out into the world and living it with joy and hope, and giving witness to it. And I think, so in a sense, the old evangelization was about bringing people into the church. The new evangelization is about bringing people out of the church into the world, which ironically may be the best way to bring people into the church.
Tom, just for purposes of time, we're going to do a lightning round for you. I think an interesting part of sharing and passing on the faith is just learning a little bit about each and every one of us, are the sort of minutia and the sort of things that normally wouldn't be asked in this type of forum, but I think could be inspiring and exciting. So, lightning round number 1, feel free to fire back at me too, I'll answer as well, but favorite saint?
St. Joseph.
Okay.
And what's yours, Matt?
Is he okay with that?
Yeah, Patrick. Patrick would be a close second.
Close second.
But depends on the time. And of course, their feast days are right together.
Oh, they're very close.
The 17th and the 19th. So I celebrate for at least 3 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it's St. Francis, because I was born in St. Francis Hospital on the Feast of St. Francis.
Oh, marvelous. Marvelous.
Quick plug, my birthday is coming up.
Yeah.
October 4th.
And I picked Joseph because I think we underrate Joseph. Well, I mean, his famous wife kind of outshone him, you know what I mean? So our devotion and cherishing of Mary kind of gives Joseph. But Joseph was a man of extraordinary faith. Oh. I mean, Matt, imagine somebody coming to you in a dream. Imagine having a dream tonight that your beloved fiancée is already pregnant,
yeah.
but by some supernatural means, like going to be a child of the Holy Spirit. And you're to take her because this child is going to be the Son of God. Now, anybody would wake up the next morning and say, yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, instead he believes the dream, he becomes a great father. He had a wonderful influence, I'm convinced, on Jesus. He helped teach him his Jewish faith. Jesus would have picked up his Jewish faith by osmosis from Mary and Joseph. So Joseph, yeah.
Favorite prayer? And I know that's a hard question, because different prayers for different circumstances.
Yeah, but I find myself saying the Our Father and the Hail Mary umpteen times a day. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm similar. When someone's asked me that question, I said, I like the classics. The old-fashioned ones. The church where you find yourself closest to God, or the place of prayer where you find yourself closest to God. And if you need time to think about that, for me, when I was in Vatican City, in St. Peter's Square, I felt at home. And it was such a powerful experience. And I know there were all these tourists, and it was hot and things like that, but to kind of be back at, the center of it all, it was really powerful. And I did one of the Scavi tours underneath and saw where the old church was, and it was powerful. It moved me.
Yeah.
Do you want me to keep talking?
Yeah, well, the tomb of Pope John the 23rd is one of my favorites there. Gloucester, I did a 30-day retreat at the Jesuit retreat house in Gloucester. And there's a place there out between the rocks, looking into the ocean, that would be my kind of holy ground.